he has had success or she has had success who has purified themselves. Some say that it refers back to Allah. Zakkaha, Allah, who is Muzakki. And in reality, He is the Muzakki. He's the one that purifies. And Dasaha, Dasa means to stunt the growth. Zakat yazku means to grow. Like zakat is a way of growing your wealth. When you pay zakat, it's like watering your own wealth. And so the heart grows, or it's stunted. So if you look at an oak tree begins with a seed. The human being begins with a seed. Your heart is a seed, and you have to grow it. And the heart can get so big that it fills the universe, like the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ibn al-Jawzi, the student, the student of Ibn Taymiyyah, said in Kitab al-Ruh that the heart of the Prophet was bigger than the universe. Because the Ruh is also, is that essence, the heart of the human being, the soul, the essence of the human being. And so, purification of the heart is essential for a number of reasons, but that is the single most important one, that it's the way to get close to Allah. And Allah is with the broken-hearted. One of the things about dunya is it's designed to break your heart. Very often your spouse is there to break your heart. And your children are there to break your heart. Because it's in the breaking of the heart that light penetrates the heart. And that's why hard-hearted people, their hearts never break, because they're like stone. It's the good people whose hearts break. And so the dunya by its nature is designed to break the human heart. Because this is not our place. And if you think you're here to be happy and to be just having a good time, you're in the wrong place. That's called paradise. Jannah. This is dunya. Dunya is a place of broken hearts. And that's why you have to have compassion towards people, because everybody's heart, if they're alive, their heart is breaking. And if you can live in this world right now and not have a broken heart, then you are a sick human being. Because the amount of human suffering on this planet right now is so overwhelming that we should really be weeping constantly. And this isn't to get depressed or to lose hope, but it's to recognize what this world is about. It's a place where you are not meant to feel comfortable. God designed it for you to actually feel uncomfortable. And so if you're comfortable in it, your heart's dead. It becomes, if you love the world, your heart becomes hard. If you love Allah, your heart becomes soft. The ulama said, if you want to know the state of your heart, look to your eyes. If your eyes are always dry, your heart's dead. And that's why the Prophet loved women, because they cry easier than men. You know, the Arabs say, يُبْكَ عَلَيْنَا وَلَا نَبْكِ عَلَى أَحَدٍ وَنَحْنَ أَغْلَظُ أَكْبَادٍ مِنَ الْإِبِلِ. The Arab, they say, people cry over us. We don't cry over anybody. Our hearts, our livers, which is the source of the emotion in traditional, our livers are tougher than camels' livers. That's not the way of the Prophet's lives. And those Arabs were not the Arabs the Prophet came to. A man came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he saw him kiss his grandchildren, and he said, "Taqabbal al-awlad," and he said, "Do you kiss children?" He said, "Yes." He said, "I have 10 children. I've never kissed one of them." And the Prophet said, do I have anything for somebody who God has taken mercy out of their hearts? Like, my religion is no good for you. It won't benefit you. Ar-Rahman, right? Those who show mercy, the Rahman, the merciful, will show mercy to them. Have mercy on those in the earth, and the one in the heavens will have mercy on you. And the source of mercy is the human heart. Right? And so the bigger the heart, the more the mercy and the compassion.
This is my answer.
To purify your heart, they have like a lot of stages. So can you define the cause? Define and tell us the cause of
of how the process. Well, I mean, the first thing to know is that life is a journey. People who do a practice like martial arts or music or some type of practice that is incremental, they know that they have to practice every day. And over time, you get better at what you're doing if you're practicing properly. You know, they say practice makes perfect. That's not true if you're practicing the wrong thing. Practice makes permanent. So you have to practice the right thing. And so purification of the heart, it's a practice that you do. One of the things that a lot of Muslims, there's people that say, oh, I pray and I don't feel anything. And there's people that say that I don't feel anything. Well, part of the problem is that you don't understand what prayer is doing to you. Prayer it's an incremental thing. It's a practice that you do, and you have to be focused. There are people that get to a certain, like if you look at an athlete or a musician, there's people that and I'm using sports and music because these are things that are honored in our civilizations today. You know, there's world-class musicians and athletes, and people put them way up. But many people can just play tennis, and they don't play it very well, but they get to a certain point, and they just, every day they play it, and they do the same. They don't get better. The same is true for a martial artist. They get to a certain level, and that's it. A person who's on a process of mastery, they have to practice in a way that they're actually getting better, but it's incremental. It's a very slow process. And in that way, traditionally, that is why they prefer that you did this with a teacher. And historically, that was the way you did it. Unfortunately, we're living in a time where a lot of teachers are false teachers. So there's a lot of people that claim to be spiritual teachers, but they're actually spiritual abusers. And so many Muslims have been disillusioned by the traditional path of purification. One of the things that Ahmed Zarruq, one of the great scholars of our tradition, wrote a book, Hidayat Rabbi and the Faqt al-Murabbi, the guidance of my Lord when you lose spiritual teachers to help you get guidance. And he said one of the most important practices is to do prayer on the Prophet ﷺ. The more prayer you do, the closer you get to Allah. And he said that if you do prayer on the Prophet every day, 500 times, that would be 100 times after every prayer. If you do that every day, you could do it very simple, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, and just do that 100 times after each prayer. He said that will take the place of a spiritual guide. And that's important guidance for our time. Most of the traditional masters of spirituality in the Islamic tradition said that towards the latter days, the three most important dhikrs would be La ilaha illallah, astaghfirullah, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, and La ilaha illallah. Just those three. Just doing that a lot and being in a state of awareness. And then the other thing is to recognize that you have a choice. When you get angry, it's a choice. We forget this, that you have a choice about which path you're going to take. So it's very important to start becoming more aware of your emotions. And when you start feeling angry, to recognize it. And then when, every once in a while, if you have a bad temper, what they call choleric personality, every once in a while you lose your temper, you have to then step back, apologize to the people you got angry at, and then work on not doing it again. And one of the best means for that, the Prophet gave us the most amazing anger management, and we don't follow it. He said, if you get angry and you're standing up, sit down. Because anger is demonic. It's fire and air. So you start rising, like, what do people do when they get angry? What? You're talking to me? They get up and they get, just sit down. And he said, if that doesn't work, lie down. Could you imagine getting in a fight with somebody and then you sit down and you're still feeling angry and then you lie down? He's going to laugh at you. It'll diffuse your fight. And he said, and if that still doesn't work, then he said, go do wudu, because water puts out fire. But this is an age where a lot of people are very angry. And there's reasons for it. Like Palestinians have every right to be angry. Syrians have every right to be angry. African Americans in the United States have every right to be angry. A lot of people have justification for their anger, but is anger a rung on the spiritual ladder to God? That's the question. And our religion says it's not. So feeling angry is not going to solve your problems. And that's why we need to have ways to channel our anger into righteous behavior, to doing positive things, instead of allowing it to take us over and consume us.
This actually happened to my friend. He was so angry, he scolded me. And after he took his wudu, he started crying and weeping like a baby.
Subhanallah. No, it really works. This is a true story. I was at, the Prophet said, Abshu salam bainakum, spread peace amongst you. He said, if you say salam alaikum amongst you, that love will emerge. I was in the Haram, and I went every day in the morning at Fajr. I was with Shaykh Hamza Yusuf. He's a well-known scholar from Al-Ahsab, and he can testify. Every morning we went, there was the same guard at the gate, and I greeted him very warmly, salam alaikum. And the first day he said, wa alaikum salam, like really angry. And I just went in. The next morning I saw same man. I said, salam alaikum, akhi, my brother. Wa alaikum salam. And then the next morning I came, same man. I said, salam alaikum. He looked at me and was like, wa alaikum salam. A little nicer. The next morning I came, same man. This is a true story, I'm not making this up. And I said, salam alaikum akhi. He came up and he hugged me. Wallahi, I swear to God, he came up and he gave me a hug. Yeah, no, you can break people, you can wear them down.
Since you talk about food, can you explain us what the difference between food and shahwa?
Hub and shahwa are related. Allah put the erotic desire in human beings because one of the poets, he said, لَنَا أُسْوَةٌ فِي بِشْرِ هِنْدٍ وَأُخْتِهَا وَقَيْسٍ وَلَيْلَةٍ ثُمَّ مَيٍّ وَغَيْلَانٍ. We have a sign in, and then he used these Arabic tropes for Romeo and Juliet. They're famous love stories of the Arabs. That we have a sign in their love about the love of God. أَدِينُ بِدِينِ الْحُبِّ أن توجه تركه فحبي ديني وإيماني. I follow the religion of love. Wherever his caravans go, I go. My religion is the religion of love. My faith and deen is love. And so the erotic tendency was put into us because we desire union by our nature. And the greatest desire is to have a restoration of our relationship with our Lord. And this is not in any kind of literal way of union, like when the people of this science talk about union with God. They don't mean in any way hulul or becoming one with God. They mean arrival at knowledge of God. That you've restored your knowledge of God. Because we had a knowledge of God, and so that tendency in the human being for this is an important tendency. So shahwa is part of this, like our appetite. So you have different loves. The shahwa for food is an appetite towards the vegetative. The shahwa for money is an appetite for the mineral. And the shahwa for the sexual shahwa is an appetite for the animal. But these three kingdoms, the animal, the mineral, and the vegetable, these are all kingdoms that disappear. And so the real desire should be the desire for God. And so hope, in its purest form, is God's alone. Like everything you love in dunya will dissipate and go, except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. كُلُّ مَا عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. Everything on this world is disappearing before your eyes. And the only thing that remains forever is the reality of God. And our souls, which in traditional language was called, in European language, eternal. They have a beginning, but Allah made them without end. And so they abide with God, billah. And the highest love is the love of God. But He gave us appetite and desire as a way of directing us to the ultimate desire. Because كُلُّ مَا تَهْوَاهُ الوجود في ذات الله. One of the great Turkish poets. He said, everything you desire is with God. What you really desire. And this is why all human desire, what you desire in the opposite sex, if you see beauty, what you're really seeing is a tajalli of a divine attribute. Allah put beauty in the world because He's beautiful and He loves beauty. So when you see something beautiful, that attraction is an attraction to the divine, but you're being fooled by this temporal thing that, Maulana Rumi, he said one man's beloved is a bag of blood and the other is the sun of splendor. So Allah has done this for a hikmah, there's a wisdom in it, and it doesn't diminish the reality of loving your spouse, loving your children. The Prophet had those human qualities, but ultimately all of those loves are only drops from the ocean of the love of God, and that's why He put them in the world.
I got you answered most of the questions, but since we're talking about when Prophet Muhammad passed away, it is told by some of the ulama, even the king cried,
Yes.
and the governor
Yes.
killed himself.
Yes.
And
Ya'fur, his donkey committed suicide.
is that the true love? Because that is like inside the camp of all the human beings.
The Prophet ﷺ, one of the things that we were taught was كل مصيبة بعدك يا رسول الله جلل. Every calamity after you is insignificant. And this is why if you've lost a child, you have to know that our Prophet buried 5 children. He buried his children. If you've lost all your wealth, know that the Prophet ﷺ lost all of his wealth. If you're a refugee, like these Syrians now, if you're a refugee, know that your Prophet was a refugee. If you're an orphan, know that your Prophet was an orphan. If you've been persecuted, know that your Prophet ﷺ was persecuted. If you've had a broken heart, know that your Prophet ﷺ had a broken heart. He buried his children. Anything that you have tribulation in, you have to know that our Prophet went through that, and in knowing that, you know that even the most beloved of God had the same tribulations that you're going through. And so it's just important to keep that in mind, that the Prophet ﷺ, one of the most important things to remember is that the greatest tribulation that afflicted our ummah was his death. Because revelation was cut off. Once he left the world, that communication, direct communication between us and God was cut off. And now the communication is through ijtihad, which is always going to be open to error. And so, love of the Prophet ﷺ is one of the most important things to inculcate in our children and in our families. Our Prophet ﷺ, the women now, in many places, our women are dishonored, they're not respected. Our Prophet respected women. He said that لَا يُكْرِمُهُنَّ إِلَّا كَرِيمٌ. No one honors women except an honorable man. وَلَا يُهِينُهُنَّ إِلَّا اللَّئِيمٌ. And no one denigrates a woman except a vile, contemptible man. And so anything that you see out there now in the Muslim Ummah that's negative, it's a direct result of leaving his sunnah. And anything good you see, it's a result of following his sunnah. And we have to remember, فَلْيَحْذِرِ الَّذِينَ يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ أَنْ تُصِيبَهُمْ فِتْنَةٌ أَوْ يُصِيبَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Let them be forewarned. Our Lord says in the Quran, let them be forewarned. Those who go against the command of the Prophet, they will be afflicted with calamities and painful chastisement. And ummati ummatun marhuma. My ummah is a ummah that has mercy upon it. إنما جعل عذابها في دنياها. الفتن, الزلازل, والحرج, والقتل. That the tribulations of my ummah are in this world. So if we disobey Allah and His Messenger, we will get our punishment in this world. So when you look at the Muslim world, you have to understand that what we're seeing is actually rahmah. It's hard to see it, but you have to see the rahmah in the adab. because our Lord is merciful, and our community has disobeyed their Lord and has distanced themselves so far from this religion. And we have now people that are doing the worst things in the name of Islam. And then we have people, pornography is widespread in the Muslim community, the denigration of women. We have financial corruption. We have commercial transactions. We have governments that eat the wealth of the people. All of these things are happening in our ummah. And then we've lost the discourse of our tradition. Our tradition was a discourse of difference of opinion. Now, if you don't follow my opinion, you're kafir. We have adab ikhtilaf. This community of Malaysia, even before Islam, it was a community of adab, courtesy, because it's just embedded in the tradition of the people. But Islam brought a codification of adab, which is akhlaq. Sayyidina Qibr Abbas, he said that adab has a cognitive component, an understanding, right thinking, but then it has a practical component, a way of being in the world. But that way of being comes from understanding, and this is why everything begins with the rectification of ideas. If you don't rectify the ideas, then the behavior will not be rectified. And if you look at the Muslim world now, the behavior all emanates from wrong ideas. Part of it, at the ethical level, it's the inability to distinguish between real goods and apparent goods. People think that money is a real good. One of the beauties of the Quran is that it reminds us that there are two ways that Allah tries people in the world, with privilege and privation. These are the two great tribulations of the world. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانِ إِذَا ابْتَلَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَأَكْرَمَهُ وَنَعَمَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَكْرَمَنِ. Allah says if he tries a man with blessings like money and children and wealth, all these things, with blessings, and honors him, he says, Rabbi akraman, my Lord, he honored me. He thinks that those things, those outward things, are a sign that God has honored him. But if he's in privation, if he's poor, if he's being persecuted, if he's in subjection, if all these tribulations, he says, Rabbi ahanani, my Lord has denigrated me, humiliated me. What does Allah say? What's his response? Kalla. No, your understanding is incorrect. And that's why Allah has privileged some over others in provision. Allah did that. He made rich people, He made poor people. He made oppressors, He made oppressed. All of these things are from God. And so if you lose sight of that, and so one of the reasons why it uses the word ba'al, that He privileged some of you over others, because our commentators say you don't know the one Allah's preferred, the one in privation or the one in privilege. Some people in privilege will be honored in the akhirah, but many people won't, because privilege is a worse tribulation than privation. And this is why dunya has a different set of criteria. If you don't understand these metaphysical truths, then you will misinterpret the world you're in, and you will have a terrible time on this planet, because you'll totally misunderstand what this place is about. The akhirah is where everything is made clear. The dunya, everything is difficult. This is darul ibtila. It's a place of tribulation, of privilege and privation. And if you're in privation, Allah knows why you're in privation, because He does not withhold from bukhl, from miserliness. He withholds from wisdom. And He does not give from generosity of honoring. He gives with wisdom. And so who He gives and whom He withholds, that's He's al-Hakim. And the difference between us and everybody else is that we are willing to set aside our own judgment in this world about these things, what the Christians call the mystery of iniquity. We're willing to set those aside and to bracket them and to wait for the akhirah for this to be made clear, because Allah says He will make this clear. And this is the difference between iman and kufr. Either you believe it or you don't. And there's evidence not to believe it. People that reject God and religion and things, they have their evidences. And that's why there's a lot of them out there. But we believe that the overwhelming evidence is to believe it. And Allah has made a world where if it was absolutely clear, faith would have no meaning. It's not absolutely clear. It's a place where you have to make a choice. Which way are you going to go? Are you going to believe in God and trust God? Or are you going to believe in all of these materialists who tell you how horrible the world is? And it is horrible. There's much beauty in the world and wonder, but there's also there are children being raped right now. There are people who are having their houses torn down. There are people that their money is being taken away from them. There are people getting cancer right now. There are people that are dying of illnesses right now. There are children that are in pain in hospitals right now. All of that is true. But there's also mothers suckling their children right now. There's people helping the orphan right now. There's people taking care of widows right now. There are people honoring people out of love for their knowledge. There are people that are educating the ignorant. There are people in prisons right now serving the forgotten people. There are people now, I was with a woman who, she's an English woman, pediatric surgeon. This is one of the highest specialties in medicine. A pediatric surgeon can make fortunes in Western countries. She was from England, and I met her recently. She has been working for 3 years saving children's lives in Syria. So those bombs that are destroying those children, there are people that are giving up cushy lives in England to serve those children. Where does that come from? What was in her heart that made her give up all of that dunya to go and serve? That is a secret from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we have to see the world for what it is. But we make a choice. And our choice is to believe in Allah and His messengers, all of those messengers, but also to feel grateful and fortunate that we're part of the last messenger, the one who came and sealed and finalized the messages of God to humanity. And His religion, we believe, is the one true religion without rejecting the truths in the other religions. But His religion is the one true religion that is in its pristine purity. All of the other religions have been tainted according to our belief. And His religion, we believe, abrogated those previous traditions. This is the belief of the Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This is our belief. Allah Ta'ala.
Last question. One last question. Okay, there's some hadiths, Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, "Irda bima qasama Allahu lak takun aghna an-nas." Is that?
Who say that?
Irda bima qasama Allahu
Yeah.
lak takun aghna an-nas.
Yeah.
Is that like the clear heart because of Rida?
Well, I mean, again, it gets back to privilege and privation. Be content with what has apportioned you. That doesn't mean that you can't go out and try to expand your business and do better in life. That's not negating that. But whatever comes, be content with it in that you're pleased with it. And the beauty of that hadith is that if you really are content with Allah, He'll increase you. That's the truth of the hadith. تَأَذَّنَ رَبُّكُمْ لَئِنْ شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. Your Lord has announced, He has declared that if you're grateful, He will increase you. And one of the things that is in our ummah is a lot of ingratitude and complaining. You hear this all over the ummah, people complain. And it's getting worse, my friends, because of our complaints. We should be grateful for what we have. It's not to say that there aren't things out there that are wrong. There are. We should work to improve the conditions. But we should thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our Prophet never was ungrateful. And I went through all of the recorded khutbahs of our Prophet. In none of those, I could not find in any of his khutbahs complaining about the Quraysh or what the Quraysh were doing. I never saw it. His khutbahs were all attaqullah, ati'u, anfiqu, give out, do this, be grateful. He didn't complain about people. He didn't complain about his oppressors. He complained to God. He didn't complain to people. Don't complain to people. Complain to Allah. Allah loves complaints. People hate complaints. Unless they're doing it themselves. They don't like to hear your complaints. Nobody wants to hear you complain. So stop complaining. Just really be grateful. I'm grateful. And I'll tell you, I recently was in Washington, D.C., and there was a homeless man. He was really bereft. And I just stopped. I took out $1. I gave $1. And I said, how are you doing? He said, God it's warm today. Because it was winter. He said, thank God it's warm. That's what he said to me. He didn't say, I'm doing, can't you see how lousy I'm doing? I'm sitting here begging. What do you think I'm doing? He just said, thank God it's warm. Like he saw the blessing in the tribulation. And Ibn Abbas said, in every tribulation, there's 3 blessings. Every tribulation, there's 3 blessings to be grateful for. First one, it could have been worse. If a tsunami comes, it could have been a nuclear bomb. Right? It could be worse. If you lost one arm, you could have lost both arms. If you lost a tooth, you could have lost all your teeth. You lost one eye, it could have been both eyes. Many, you could always see it could have been worse. That's the first blessing. So, alhamdulillah, could have been worse. Second blessing, that it's in your dunya and not in your deen. You lost all your money, alhamdulillah, you didn't lose your faith. And the third blessing, it's in this world and not in the next world. And those are all reasons to be grateful. Jazakumullah khairan. Terima kasih.